IBC Bank, we realize that people make Texas the great state it is. That's why, as your community bankers, we believe in personal relationships and giving back to the people we serve. So from business loans to checking accounts and home loans, look to IBC. For exceptional service with a hometown perspective, we think you'll find no other bank in Texas does more.
Okay, David.
All right. Am I on? Can you all hear me? Yes. No? How about now? Well, you're having technical difficulties, but that never stops me. All right. Welcome again to our series. We're blessed and honored to have Chancellor McRaven with us here today. It's a great turnout. I'm sure Donald is going to have some wonderful questions to ask. As you know, IBC has been sponsoring this series from the very beginning, jointly with the Monitor and McAllen Chamber of Commerce. It's been a great series. We get a lot of information. Carlos asks some very strong questions, fair and balanced, or just direct. They're good questions. And IBC not only has been a sponsor of this, but we've been great partners with all the universities in Texas where we have a market presence. And UT, of course, with 17 institutions. It's 14 or 17?
14.
14 institutions, of which UTRGV is one of them. We've been great sponsors in not only fundraising, scholarships, and things like that, but currently we're in partnership with MD Anderson, International Bank of Commerce. We're having a summer fundraising for the research, just for research only, and we pledged that we would match every dollar we raise from our staff, our customers, and our friends. We started this event, this project 2 weeks ago, and we're already up to $800,000.
Wow.
Our goal with the IBC match is to be $4 million. So we hope we'll get there. Now we're going to do the same thing for UTRGV once we get this project out of the way, and we'll try to do something well planned out with Kelly Cronin and ask all of you to help us when we do the UTRGV fundraiser. So with that, I turn it over to Carlos.
Thank you, David.
See,
Good morning.
He's got the mic.
UT System Chancellor William McRaven, a retired U.S. Navy four-star admiral, leads one of the nation's largest systems of higher education. He oversees 14 institutions that educate 217,000 students and employ 20,000 faculty and more than 70,000 healthcare professionals, researchers, and staff. He became Chancellor in January 2015. Before then, he was commander of U.S. Special Operations Command and led a force of 69,000 men and women worldwide. As a commander, McRaven has overseen some of America's most celebrated recent military achievements, from the rescue of Captain Richard Phillips, which inspired the movie starring Tom Hanks, to the pursuit and capture of Saddam Hussein, to Operation Neptune Spear, which resulted in the death of Osama bin Laden. Please join me in welcoming Chancellor William McRaven.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Chancellor, in your honor this morning, and much to the bafflement of my wife, I woke up and made my bed.
Good for you. Good for you. Well, I was in a hotel room, and I'll be honest with you, I didn't make my hotel room bed, so.
Can you explain to this group the significance of making your bed?
Thanks, Carlos. Well, first, let me start by saying how much I appreciate the support of the Chamber, IBC, and the Monitor for putting on this event today. I love coming down to the Valley. As you may know, I've visited the Valley more than any of the other institutions at UTRGV. I also want to recognize, of course, President Guy Bailey, who is the president of RGV, doing a great job, Guy, and I hope to have an opportunity to talk a little bit more about that. And of course, one of our finest regents, Ernie Aliseda here. Regent Aliseda, thanks very much. To the question, so I had the opportunity back in 2014 to be the commencement speaker for UT. And as I was preparing for my remarks, frankly, I was having trouble getting my initial theme to come together. And I remember it was Wednesday of the night of the week before the event that I had come to kind of writer's block. I just couldn't make my remarks work. And my wife, as great wives do, came up to me and said, look, stop trying to make this work. Why don't you write about something you know? And I thought, well, no, there's a good idea. Write about something you know. So for the next couple of days, I began to put together my thoughts on basic SEAL training. And one of the first things they teach you in basic SEAL training is, or not that they teach you, but they make sure that you make your bed. And so to the students that were in the audience that evening, I told them the importance of making your bed. And in basic SEAL training, you have to make your bed exactly right. You have to make sure you have hospital corners that are at 45-degree angles. You have to make sure that the one pillow you get is positioned exactly in the center of the bed. You have this old woolen Navy blanket that has to be folded exactly right. And I remember when they first kind of went through this drill, I thought, well, no, this is a little ridiculous. I mean, we're here to become Navy SEALs. Why do we have to understand how to make a bed? Why is making a bed important? All of my instructors were Vietnam veterans, and they understood the value of making the bed. And the point from the instructors to the SEAL trainees was, one, if you make your bed the first thing when you get up in the morning, it gives you a sense of accomplishment. You have checked something off your list. And once you do one thing in the morning, it encourages you to do other things. But it was also about doing the little things right. And the point the instructors wanted to make is, if you can't do the little things right, if you can't even get up and make your bed, then how will you lead SEALs on a mission? And so this was a very, very important lesson that, frankly, again, I had learned early on from my parents, but I'm not sure I understood why. My dad, a retired Air Force officer, just used to say, son, make your bed. Okay, Dad. It wasn't until I got into the Navy that I really understood the value of making your bed, and consequently, I try to do it every day as, again, some way to start your day off right.
A very profound life lesson. My German Shepherd appreciated I made my bed and immediately jumped on. That commencement speech I would recommend that everyone watch. There's about 4 million views now on YouTube. You really need to check it out. You actually talked about 10 life lessons that you drew from your training with the Navy SEALs. Can you give me a sense of how profound that experience was going through Navy SEALs training?
I think what the training did, at least for me, and I think for the other young men going through, was it really kind of established a baseline from which the rest of life would unfold. So you were made about as miserable and as uncomfortable, and you were stressed to the max as you went through basic SEAL training. And in about the 9th week of SEAL training, you go through what we refer to as Hell Week. And back then, Hell Week was 6 days of no sleep, constant physical movement. You are swimming, you are running, you are lifting logs, you are doing something for 6 days straight with no sleep. When you succeed, if you succeed through Hell Week, then frankly, that becomes your benchmark for what else can I do in life? So when life gets tough, and certainly life in the teams, when you're conducting combat missions, you always kind of came back and said, well, is it as hard as it was in Hell Week? If I only miss 3 days of sleep, well, it's not as hard as it was in Hell Week. Well, if I'm really cold, which you tend to get very cold when you're a Navy SEAL, well, am I as cold as I was in Hell Week? Am I as miserable as I was in Hell Week? So very early on, you've established this threshold from which all of the rest of life's pain and drama is set in context. Now, there are some things, obviously, you can't replicate in training. We didn't lose anybody in training, so there's nothing quite like losing a soldier in combat or losing a loved one, so you can't replicate that. But the physical pains that you go through in life, and I think certainly in the military, were all set and were all framed by my time in SEAL training.
And what did that experience teach you about leadership?
Well, a lot of lessons on leadership. Late in the training, in what we call third phase, you're in land warfare training. And again, all of my instructors were Vietnam veterans. And there was one particular drill we had to do, which was how do you get out of an ambush? So in Vietnam, the SEALs were often ambushed as they were patrolling through the jungle. And you had to understand how to get out of an ambush. And when you are ambushed by the enemy, you're immediately in the kill zone. And so what you have to do right up front is you have to return fire as quickly as you can and then move out of the kill zone. So in the course of a particular drill we were doing, I was the SEAL platoon commander as part of this training. And we were walking down this makeshift path, and we knew the instructors, the SEAL training instructors, were going to engage us with blank ammunition. And I knew that my responsibility when that happened, it was all part of the preset drill, was to move the SEAL platoon out of the kill zone as quickly as possible. Well, so as we're patrolling along, all of a sudden the ambush comes. I yell ambush right. We all drop down. We engage the instructors, the enemy. But at one point in time, it occurred to me, this is my John Wayne moment. I know exactly what to do. I knew where the instructors were. They were hiding behind a row of heavy brush. So I decided from my position, I was the number 2 man in the line of march, that I would get up, move around, and come up behind the instructors and mow them all down, and we'd, I'd be John Wayne and we would have won the battle. So I get up from my position, I move around the brush, and sure enough, there are the instructors. They never see me. I open up with my automatic weapon with the simulated fire, and I'm thinking, woohoo, great, I won. The instructors were mad, but the platoon was even madder. And I didn't understand why. I said, we won. And they said, sir, we had no idea where you went. In the middle of the firefight, you got up and ran. And I said, no, I didn't get up and run. I was running around to get the bad guys. And they said, we didn't see that. All we saw was in the middle of the training exercise, you got up and left us. And the instructive piece there was the firefight. The ambush is like any crisis. So when you think about a crisis, whether it's a crisis of leadership, whether it's a crisis in health, whether it's a crisis in the academics, the one thing you have to do as a leader is communicate. You have to communicate to the people that are in your organization. So you have to understand that that SEAL platoon had no idea what I was doing. I knew what I was doing. I got up and began to move, but they didn't know what I was doing. So I never forgot that lesson that in the middle of problems happening, make sure you're communicating to the people that work for you. Make sure they understand what you're doing, why you're doing it, because if you don't do that in the middle of the crisis, you're liable to lose their confidence, and frankly, you're liable to fail to the crisis. So that was always a good lesson from basic SEAL training.
Now that Hell Week experience, how has that helped you in your transition from military to civilian life?
Well, the transition, and I've had a chance to tell folks this before, surprisingly, I think, to most folks, the transition from my last job, and as you mentioned it, Carlos, I was the commander of U.S. Special Operations Command down in Tampa. But that job was very similar to what I do here as the CEO of the University of Texas System. In the military, we have what we refer to as subordinate commanders. So as the SOCOM commander, I actually had 12, I didn't have 14, but I had 12 subordinate commanders. Some of them were 3-star equivalents, some of them were 2 stars, a couple of 1 stars. And so as I look at this job, I have subordinate commanders, if you will, that are the presidents of the institutions. And always in the military, you know that your role is as a servant leader. My responsibility as the Chancellor and as the CEO is obviously to the board and to the people of Texas, but when I look down, it's to make sure that President Guy Bailey and UTRGV are well taken care of, that I am doing my job to support the presidents of the university. And you saw that at U.S. Special Operations Command. My job as the 4-star was to make sure that the 3 stars, the 2 stars, and the 1 stars had the resources they needed, had the guidance they needed, had the people they needed to be able to do the job. But also in my job as U.S. SOCOM commander, I spent a lot of time up on Capitol Hill, and obviously here I'm at the Capitol quite a bit, working with our great lawmakers on both the House side and the Senate side. I spent a lot of time with the press. In special operations, it was a little bit harder because obviously the press would ask you a question, and you were generally, your response was, well, no comment, because of the nature of the business. You couldn't talk a whole lot. But all of these things were very, very familiar. I also have a magnificent executive staff at the UT system. It is interesting when I have a chance to talk to my military counterparts, they always want to know, well, now that you've transitioned, how are those faculty people? How does that work out for you? And I said, well, the faculty is great, but what you have to understand is my staff at the University of Texas System Administration are senior executives. They are incredibly professional. And in fact, I would tell you they're probably one of the, if not the most professional staff I've ever worked with. So the transition from running U.S. Special Operations Command to running the system, for me at least, has been seamless. Now, I can't speak for my staff or others, but for me, it's gone pretty smoothly.
Now, you mentioned your father. I understand he was a colonel in the Air Force and a Spitfire pilot.
Right.
What did he teach you about leadership?
Yeah, my father was a World War II fighter pilot, a little bit of time in Korea, and then he retired out of Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio, which is where I grew up, in 1967. And you know, the parents of those days, so I was born in 55 and kind of raised in the late 50s, early 60s. And you know, the men back in those time, I think they were not huggers. They were not, you know, the generation has changed. They were a little bit more standoffish. But what my father taught me always, and he was not a, you know, people think of guys in the military as being very draconian, very, other than making my bed. We had a great time. I mean, I grew up in Texas hunting and fishing and doing all the sort of things that young men and their fathers, I think, ought to be doing. And my dad had played professional football for the Cleveland Rams back in 38 to 40. So he was a phenomenal athlete. So he taught me those things, you know, how to play football and baseball and basketball. So we spent a lot of time together, a lot of time down here in the valley and at South Padre Island. My parents loved to come down here. So I had a great family experience growing up.
Excellent. Now, interestingly, as I was kind of evaluating your biography, it occurred to me that both in your previous experience in the military and now as chancellor, that the largest portion of your constituency are young people.
Right.
How are they different between soldiers and students? Do you see any differences?
You know, it was one of the reasons I took the job, is as I was getting ready to retire from the military, and my wife and I were looking at our options. And for a senior officer, there are a lot of options out there. But the one thing I loved about the military, and I think the one thing I know that my wife loved about the military, was our engagement with, you know, the young soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and their spouses. And they are young. They come into the military sometimes at the age of 17, but our population was generally well under 30. And you're asking these families at the time, of course, the 9/11 generation in particular, they come in, you know, they're having to deploy constantly. The member is deployed overseas. The spouse stays back taking care of the family. These were tough, tough times. But what we enjoyed most was trying to help them through those times, trying to take a 17-year-old and say, how do you make sure that by the time they're 30 or 35 or 40 that they are a great citizen in the United States, that they've got their life together. I mean, it's a wonderful experience dealing with these people. And the one thing that I've told folks is you should never doubt this millennial generation. They are just absolutely fabulous. And you know, they get a lot of criticism heaped on them for a whole variety of things. But I'm a baby boomer, and I think back on the baby boomer generation. I think we had a lot of criticism heaped on us, as did the generation before them, and so on. These millennials are incredibly bright. They're very social, even though we talk about the devices that they carry, but they're a very social group. And they're not afraid of taking risks. So they are exactly the generation we want to be leading this nation. So having the opportunity to come back to higher education and just be part of this and spend time, again, working with the presidents to help make sure that, that this generation matures in a way that will be good for America, that's as good as a job gets.
And the college students, do you see similarities in their ambitions and their responses to life crisis?
I do, especially, frankly, here in the Valley. You know, when I have an opportunity to go to the Brownsville campus or the McAllen campus, and you spend time with these students, many of whom are first generation going to school, you see that same sort of dedication, frankly, that I saw in my Navy SEALs. I mean, they come in, they have a goal, they have an objective. They work hard to achieve that. They're proud of the work they do. They've got a great support infrastructure. I think it is part of who this generation is. So it is inspiring to spend time around them.
Now, you've been in your present position about 18 months.
Right.
How has it gone for you?
I think anytime you run a large organization, you know, you things you do well and things you don't do so well, things you could have done better. I've been very pleased with the progress we've made. We are, and again, it's hard for the outside folks to see, but we are making some dramatic changes within UT system administration. We're trying to improve our communications with the campuses. As I said, my role is to be both responsive to the Board of Regents and ensure that the campuses have the resources they need to be responsive to the state of Texas. So we're trying to make sure that the plans that the presidents have from the universities are aligned with the resources so we can properly resource them, and whether that is additional, what we refer to as the PUF, the Permanent University Fund, the debt capacity to build more buildings, whether that is available university funds to start new initiatives and for excellence. All that has to be appropriately lined up. We have to have our priorities. We have to make sure we're funding those priorities, that we that we don't spend a lot of money on things that really aren't priorities. So we go through this, this drill every day at the University of Texas System Administration to make sure that we are properly taking care of our universities. And so that part has been, I think, again, exciting for me because there's been such buy-in from the staff. They want to make sure that we're doing well by the universities. I went through the legislative session. I took the job on January 5th, and we started the legislative session just a few days later. And a lot of folks have asked me about that, and I said, you ought to, and not just because we have members sitting here, I've said this many times, you ought to be very proud of your lawmakers. They do an incredible job. And now, I will tell you, it is based on how I have viewed Capitol Hill for some time. But it was very frustrating to me my last several years in uniform about how bad Capitol Hill worked. Why we couldn't get negotiated agreements on a whole lot of things that were good for the American people. It was frankly not working well. Then you come down here, you see legislators come in, they've got 140 days. They're building bridges and roads and helping higher education and health care, and in 140 days they get the bills written, the governor signs it, and whether you would agree with it or not, things get done. Things get done. I mean, that's a novel idea. And so my first session, I was excited about it. I enjoyed meeting the members. Now again, I didn't agree on everything that they put forward, and I'm sure they didn't agree everything that I put forward. But at the end of the day, things moved forward. And so again, that part has been just fascinating for me. And we'll roll into another session here pretty soon. I think we're ready for that. We're going to work with the other chancellors around Texas to make sure that we have kind of some consolidated ideas that will be important for all of Texas higher education. And again, I'm looking forward to it.
So we can conclude that Congress provided its own type of hell week that you learned
Not
from
at all.
here.
Not at all. Not at all. Oh, Congress on Capitol Hill, you
Yes.
bet. Absolutely.
One of the things during that last legislative session that you opposed that is about to befall us in less than 2 weeks
Right.
is campus carry.
Right.
Tell me a little bit about your feelings, and is the UT system prepared as this law goes into effect?
Yeah, we're absolutely prepared, and I'm very appreciative of the work that has gone on, again, from the presidents, and of course, each of the campuses, and the way the bill is written is the presidents of each of the universities and health-related institutions, they are the ones that design and develop their approach to following the law. And the law recognizes that each campus is going to be a little different. So UTRGV will be different than Austin, which will be different from MD Anderson. Now, what we did at the system administration was we convened on a weekly basis the task forces that were developed at each one of the institutions to make sure where we could we had some consistency across the institutions. But really, as the chancellor, I was not in a position to review the input from the presidents. That input went directly from the presidents to the Board of Regents. But I am very comfortable that as we start 1 August, that we have put all the right protocols in place and that we'll be able to provide the safety and security that's expected for our students and for our faculty, and that we will follow the law. And while, again, I was not in support of campus carry at all, as I've told folks, in the military, what you do is you argue your point all the way up until a decision is made, and once a decision is made, you salute smartly and you move out. Well, the governor has signed the bill. We understand what the law is. We are kind of saluting smartly, and we're moving out to be in compliance with the law.
Excellent. Part of your own leadership vision as you took over the UT system is something called quantum leaps.
Right.
Can you explain that?
Well, absolutely. So there are 8 quantum leaps, and we've actually put a 9th quantum leap on there, which is really about student success. But the quantum leaps came out of an assessment we did, which started last May, May of last year. And we spent about 6 months taking a look at what are the leading indicators for the state of Texas. Because again, I go back to an epiphany I had, which was, while I have a servant responsibility role to the universities, my responsibility is to the state of Texas. And this may sound subtle, but it's not. The universities are there to support the state of Texas, not vice versa. So what I wanted to know was, what are the trends in the state of Texas? Where do we, as the university system, need to focus our efforts? So we did this large assessment, And I don't think anything from the assessment would surprise you, but what it allowed me to do was to focus on key areas where I thought we could move the needle. So the first quantum leap, and they were not necessarily in priority order, was the Texas Prospect Initiative, because it recognized that really our pre-K through 12, that our pipeline is not strong. It's not really preparing kids the way it ought to be coming into higher education. What can we do in higher ed to help the pre-K through 12 pipeline so they are ready to come to college? And some of this has to do with their reading skills, some of it has to do with dual credit. I mean, we do a lot of things. We do dual credit, we do early college high schools, we have math and science academies. All of these are important. We've got to get those lined up so that we have a standard that everybody understands. We've got to make sure that the students that are taking dual credit, that are going to early college high schools, understand what the standard is so they're ready to move on to college when the time is right. But there are some other things I think we can do with the community colleges, with the primary and secondary education to kind of help them along. The second one was leadership. One of the things we found when we polled CEOs and others was they really look for leaders. That's not to say you don't want a degree in engineering or you don't want to be a law, you need a law degree, but at the end of the day, they're looking for leaders. So we have 220,000 students coming through. I want to make sure every one of those students at least has an opportunity to get some basic level leadership training so that when they come out of a University of Texas institution, wherever it is, they are leaders as well as technically proficient in whatever curriculum they went through. We also looked at making sure that we have opportunity and diversity in our faculty. So we've had a problem over the years that the bulk of our faculty are Anglo, particularly down here in the Valley, and you see obviously this is UTRGV, one of the largest Hispanic serving institutions in the nation. But the faculty still remains predominantly Anglo, and that's true of most of our Hispanic serving institutions. But we want to make sure that the faculty begins to reflect the population, because I feel it's very important for a young man or woman coming up through the ranks to be able to look up there and say, God, that person has the same background that I had, same cultural background, ethnic, racial, and that's who I want to be like. And that's not to say you can't pick role models that aren't from your ethnic or cultural background, but I think it helps when you look up there and you see somebody that reflects your culture as well. So we're looking hard at changing the faculty over time, and it's going to be a long-term proposition. I also want to change the gender equity gap. We continue to have a gap in male and female paychecks. And I told folks, I said, look, when I was in the Navy, if you pulled up my paycheck and you pulled up the female admiral's paycheck, they're identical. So if all things are equal, we ought to pay women as much as we pay men. It's that simple. Now, there are a lot of folks that say, yeah, but you have to look at publications, you have to look at background. So I got all that. But if all things are equal, then we ought to pay them an equal salary. We are also trying to, as I say, win the war for talent. Education, higher education in particular, is always competing with other institutions to get the very best faculty they can. And there's a reason for this. The best faculty brings the best students, it brings more research, it generates more dollars for the economy. Everything is better the faculty. So how do we ensure that we are recruiting and retaining the best faculty? Well, the Regents several years ago put in place the STARS program, and to give you a data point, the STARS was a fund that allowed us to go out and recruit faculty, normally those in the national academies, so very kind of high-level faculty. But we invested about $101 million over the course of the last 8 years in the STARS program. We have returned over $770 million in grants as a result of the $101 million investment. Why? Because when you bring great faculty, they bring research money with them and those sort of things. So we, the Board of Regents, have added really about an additional $30 million both to the STARS program and really what we refer to as the Rising Stars program. And this will directly affect UTRGV. The STARS program will still look at national academies, but really for a university, I think you're also looking for those kind of young Turks, the young kids that are coming up that are hot runners, and you say, hey, here's a 25, 30-year-old, 35-year-old that, okay, maybe they're not in the National Academy yet, but this person is on a great trajectory. I want that person, because that person may be a Nobel laureate 20 years from now. So this money then provides the universities an opportunity to really go out and grab those folks. We've got many others. We're looking at national security. We're trying to improve the healthcare system. We're looking at the brain health initiative. And then, of course, we have an initiative in Houston.
I'm curious about the National Security Initiative. You talked about elevating higher education's role in national security. What's the net effect of that? What is your end run gain there?
Yeah, so again, part of this is my experience in Washington is that the decision makers in Washington tend to look internal to Washington because they think that's where all the brain power is when it comes to pick an issue. Terrorism, pandemics, border control issues, immigration, and you say, really, you think K Street's the right place to go to talk about immigration and border control? Why wouldn't you come to UTRGV? Why wouldn't you come to UTEP? Why wouldn't you come to areas where, no kidding, immigration and border control are being dealt with every day, and people that really study this? You want to talk about pandemics, because pandemics are a national security? Go to UTMB. We have one of the finest laboratories in the world at UTMB. Terrorism, we have folks that are studying terrorism at the Clements Center and the Strauss Center and all around the system. So I want people in Washington to start asking, what does Texas think about this? What does Texas think about the ISIS problem? What does Texas think about the immigration problem? What does Texas think about the pandemic problem? What does Texas think about border control? As a result of that, we've been pretty fortunate here over the last year, because there are still folks in Washington who remember who I was, and they've been very gracious about coming to Austin for various forums. So we have had the Secretary of Defense and the Director of National Intelligence and the Director of CIA, and more we are finding that Austin in particular, because one, it's an easy flight from Washington, D.C. It's a straight flight on Southwestern, so Southwest Airlines, so you can get right to Austin. And we are becoming a convener of national security issues. And again, this is an opportunity for RGV and others to bring the great faculty that study these issues to a place where we can convene with very senior leaders in Washington, so they can hear what we have to say.
One thing I'm curious about, another export of Washington is demagoguery. And in light of that, your mission about integrating higher education more closely with national security comes in a context where some of our major institutions, including UTRGV, very strongly support dreamers, who are students who are here but who are not citizens. Do you find that incompatible?
Not at all. I mean, I've been a very strong supporter of the Dreamer program myself. In fact, before the last session, I went out publicly and said, I support these young kids. And part of this was, even actually before I took the job, I supported. Again, I'm raised in San Antonio. But when you come down to the Valley and you meet these young students that are dreamers, that hope to go on and serve the United States in a way that is going to make us all better, why wouldn't you want that? It doesn't make any sense to me. So I think the problem is some folks in Washington haven't had a chance to meet these young men and women. You meet them, and then you say, I get it. I understand why it is so important for folks like that, oh, by the way, came here when they were 2 or 3 years old, that we have educated throughout primary and secondary education, and now we're going to send them off to college, and they're going to come out to be a bioinformatics or a lawyer or a doctor. Why wouldn't we want that kind of quality of character in this country? So I'll continue to support that, and because it is, in my opinion, just the right thing to do.
One of your other quantum leaps has to do with the field of ethics. Tell me how critical an issue that is, do you believe, in society today?
Well, this kind of gets back to the leadership quantum leap. So one of the things, all of our institutions, RGV and others, have some level of leadership training. So the first thing I've asked my Associate Vice Chancellor, who is leading this, is I want to map out all the leadership programs so I understand what they are. And I don't want to come down and dictate to any of the campuses, okay, you have to do this, this, and this, with one exception. I want to figure out how we establish a baseline for ethics. Again, it gets back to understanding the fundamentals of leadership. If you do not have a foundation of ethics, if you don't understand that there are 3 very, very important things, you have to be moral, legal, and ethical. If your decisions are not moral, legal, and ethical, you may get away with it for a while, but you're building that foundation, it's a house of cards. It'll tumble sooner or later. And, we've all seen businesses, we've all seen, universities, we've all seen, whatever it is, that for a long time managed to get away with it and didn't really feel that one aspect of those three was important, and then all of a sudden it collapsed around them. And teaching, again, our students the value of moral, legal, ethical, I think is critical. So this isn't about, Western morals or Eastern morals or military. It's about, again, kind of an ethics, an agreed upon ethics foundation, in my opinion, based on those three, the three parts of the triangle, if you will.
One of the other things I noticed in evaluating your past and present life is there are similarities between the UT system and the Navy in that a lot of tradition, a lot of structure, and a lot of inflexibility. How tough is it as a leader to control an institution like that as opposed to having that institution control you?
Yeah, I don't think it's about controlling.
Okay.
Even in the military, I think people have this mistaken belief that as a senior officer, you turn to the soldier and say, "Soldier, do this," and the soldier says, "Yes, sir, I got it," and he goes off and does that. Well, that is not the military. Maybe it was the Marine Corps, Senator, but it certainly was not the military I was in. I mean, you have to inspire the soldiers. You have to manage the soldiers. Every once in a while, you have to cajole the soldier. I mean, this is part of leadership, is making sure that, you can't be draconian, you can't be always directive. Now, if you're in combat and you say, "Take that hill," nobody can hesitate. But the percentage of times you're in combat relative to the times you're at peace, you have to be able to inspire and motivate the soldiers. I think it's the same way with these institutions. It's not about me, directing the faculty or directing the presidents. It is about having a conversation. It's about understanding and again, making an argument for your case. So if you can't make a strong argument, then maybe your case isn't valid. So this ability for me as a leader to talk to a Guy Bailey or to talk to a Ron DePino or to talk to whoever and say, "Look, this is the direction I think we need to go. Let's have this discussion. And if you don't think it's the right direction, let's have a debate about it." Now, at the end of the day, if we have to move forward, as the CEO, I'm going to make decisions that I think are in the best interest of the system. But I would tell you all the way up to that point in time, you have to have this kind of vigorous dialogue so that you understand what the concerns of the faculty are, what the concerns of the clinicians are, what the concerns of the presidents are. If you don't do that, you're not leading. You're just directing, and there's a whole different approach to directing and leading.
And you talk about those needs occasionally to take the hill.
Right.
As we approach the next legislative session, what hills are there to take? What are your priorities?
Well, we know it's going to be a tough legislative session, and so I think we're prepared for that. As we look and begin to develop our legislative priorities, frankly, we are working with the other systems to make sure we understand what are some high-level issues that we think are important that will improve all of the Texas academic systems. Then, of course, we look at exceptional items and special items that make a difference to an RGV or to the other institutions. I think as we go through this session, we're going to have some important issues we want to put forward. I'd rather not bring them out at this point in time because, again, we're continuing to kind of coordinate with both our staffs and with the regents and with the other institutions. But all of them are really for the benefit of Texas. And again, I think this is about the argument we have to make. There are always going to be priorities. Is it roads and bridges over higher education? What I have said publicly is if the legislature has two pots of money and only one of them can go to education, I'd prefer they put that money in the pre-K through 12. Because I really do believe that our future is about these young students that are in the pipeline now. If we don't take care and solve pre-K through 12, we won't have viable institutions in the next 20 years, higher ed institutions. We're already prepared to take a 4% cut. We've been asked to look at a 4% cut. I've gone back to all of the presidents, as Guy Bailey knows. We have said, here's your budget, you're going to take a 4% cut on that. I will tell you at system administration, I'm even going deeper than that because we recognize we have to be good stewards of the taxpayers' dollars. I want to be able to roll into the legislative session and say, look, you asked us to do this. We support you. We understand you need additional revenue to take care of other things. And oh, by the way, I want to show you good faith by showing that the system administration, the higher headquarters, is prepared to go even deeper. But I really do think that the pre-K through 12 issue for us as a state, for all of you out there, we really need to get this right. We need to make sure we are teaching our young children and our young adults, and preparing them for higher education. Let me add one other thing. There has been a lot of rhetoric out there lately about the cost of higher education, and I think it's a false narrative. I know it's a false narrative. And it is a narrative that we have to get beyond, because I think it scares a lot of people. So the family that makes $60,000 or less pays nothing to go to a University of Texas school anywhere. If you're making $80,000 or less, you hardly pay anything. Even the middle class families, 60% of those middle class families are getting some sort of tuition aid. So college is affordable. But I'm afraid, as I hear the rhetoric out there that tuition is out of control, this is out of control, it's a false narrative. And the narrative has to be, you bet, college is affordable. If you want to go to college, we will find a way to get you to college. There is some institution within the University of Texas, or frankly all the other systems, that can help you out. Do not be afraid of the financial obligation, because we can take care of that. You take a look across the UT system, we have the lowest, if not the lowest, one of the lowest nationwide in terms of our student debt. After 4 years of a top quality education, the average student debt is around $21,000. That's less than the price of a small car. And oh, by the way, it doesn't depreciate. And what we know statistically, again and again and again, is if you get that degree, everything about your life will be better. Your health will be better. You will buy down fear and bigotry because you have been exposed to different people on campuses. You are going to make a lot more money in the long run. Your family and your kids are going to be better. Everything is better with an education. Do not tell the people of this state that they can't afford to go to school, because they can.
Let me challenge you on that.
Sure.
By acknowledging my son here, who just graduated from UT Austin.
Terrific.
Came back a mature young man
Good.
with a lot of knowledge and a huge student debt load.
Okay.
This notion that aid is out there,
Right.
I would agree with. But should that aid come in the form of debt? Can't there be some sort of grant program?
Of course there is. So, were you on a Pell Grant? No. So, Guy Bailey will tell you that what percentage of your freshman class was on Pell Grants, Guy? 80%. 80% of the entering class of UTRGV was on a Pell Grant, which means essentially they got their education paid for free. 80%. So I don't know your financial situation, but again, if you're in kind of the middle class, certainly your son's gonna pay more. But the fact of the matter is, how many years did it take you to, of course, if you want to expose this, but you raised it, Carlos,
I
so
did,
I'm going to dig
did.
So how many years did it take you to graduate?
1 year at UTSA and
Okay.
4 years at UT.
Okay. So obviously 5 years is going to be a little bit more than that. But a lot of this is also how that money is spent. Frankly, one of the problems, and I'll leave your son out of this, but a lot of problems we find is students take on debt. And their parents don't tell them not to. They will take on debt that they don't need to take on. Why? Because they'd rather live in this housing, development rather than this one. Oh, by the way, a little extra money because, I guarantee you, they will loan you money. The student loan folks out there are happy to loan you money. The problem is young students can take on more debt than they should. This is about students understanding how to manage their finances. So this is something else we have to be very cognizant of as we go forward. Young student, family, the parents, the freshmen, they have to say, okay, here's how much I ought to be spending on college, and the family also just needs to regulate that as well. But again, at the end of the day, whatever debt you took on, I guarantee you that will be debt that will be well served in the long run of your lifetime.
To shift the spotlight from my son over to another part of that table there, the Bert Ogden Group.
Right.
Their CEO recently became a major benefactor to UTRGV.
Right.
And during the acknowledgement of that, you spoke about being recruited while you were still in the military
Right.
for Chancellor. And part of what sealed the deal for you was the vision that was laid out regarding UTRGV. Can you elaborate on that a bit?
Yeah, you bet. It was about April of 2014, so I was still in uniform. I was still the commander of U.S. Special Operations Command. And an envoy from the University of Texas system came down and said, look, we are considering a number of folks for the chancellor's position, and would you be interested? And candidly, in April, I'm right in the middle of running my command. We had just come off the Capitol Hill's testimony season, and candidly, I was a little bitter about how that had unfolded. There were a lot of things going on in April, and I realized that I want to go from one very large job to another large job. And frankly, at the time, I said, well, thank you very much for considering me, but I kind of need to think about this. Then a couple of things happened. I had the opportunity to come down in May to do the commencement address at UT, and I had not, in my 37 years in the military, I had probably come back to Austin, half a dozen times, but it had always been for, a couple hours. So I really hadn't spent any time at UT since being in the military. So I came back, and of course, it was a beautiful evening in May. You've got 8,000 kids out there, 30,000 with the families and all that, and the towers behind you. And I had an opportunity to spend time with the faculty and the students, and you go, this higher education, this is pretty good stuff. But the event you're talking about, I think it was that was May, I think it was in June, that 3 of the regents came to visit me in Tampa. And I didn't know them. I did my Wikipedia and my Google thing, but didn't really know who they were. So they show up at my house in Tampa, and they did a couple of smart things. The first thing they did, they sat down at our dining room table, and my wife, Georgianne, was with me. And as they started talking, they turned to my wife and they said, if Bill were to take the job, what would you like to do? Kind of stunned her. She said, well, I love kind of helping with veterans. I like helping with young families. Anything I could do, I'd like to do. Later, when the regents left, my wife said, we've been in the military 37 years. Nobody ever asked me what I wanted to do. I thought, these guys are good. These guys are good. But the other thing about it was that surprised me was their passion for the Valley. Now, candidly, these were 3 white billionaires. So I got 3 white guys sitting here, and they're talking about we need to make sure that the Hispanic population in the state of Texas is rocketing up as quickly as it can. We need to make sure that what we do in the Valley in particular means something, that UT-RGV, again, this was before we started RGV, they were passionate about making sure we did right by this area. And I thought after they left, not bad for a couple of white guys, They really did understand what was important. This is it's a minority majority state. The Hispanic population is so crucial. Why would we not do everything we could to make sure, and not just the Hispanics, but everybody that is part of the culture of Texas, we need to make sure we're educating. And that was only one point. But for me, I will tell you that made me realize that they were passionate about education. Of course, we also talked about the RAC. They were passionate about healthcare. They talked about the RGV medical school that was coming along. All that was kind of part of, candidly, their kind of sales pitch to me. So between visiting Texas again and talking to the regents who clearly didn't care about themselves, they cared about the population of Texas, that put me over the top pretty quickly.
Excellent. Now, part of your itinerary this week is attending a white coat ceremony tomorrow. Tell me the significance of that.
Well, this is the beginning. For those that are going to go on to BMDs, what a great day to recognize their future in life. And really, when you look at where they are, again, there are a lot of military similarities, as you might recognize. When I went through the ROTC program at the University of Texas, at some point in time, they pin your bars on you, your shoulder boards or your bars. That's a big moment. You're progressing in the direction that your family hoped you would, that you hoped you would. There's still a hill to climb, but it is recognizing the beginning of a journey that I think is incredibly important. So I'm thrilled to be down here to be part of it.
Excellent. At this point, we can take a couple of questions from the audience, depending on time. Is there anybody who has any questions? Oh, okay. I wasn't given a question, but a directive.
Okay, by all means.
A couple of people I'd like to introduce just to acknowledge the presence here is, of course, Congressman Ruben Hinojosa. There he is. U.S. Federal Judge Ricardo Hinojosa, a big UT supporter.
Saw the judge earlier.
Of course, State Senator Juan Chuy Hinojosa. A lot of Hinojosas here.
That's all right.
State Representative Bobby Guerra. McAllen Mayor Jim Darling. Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board member Fred Farias. And you mentioned Regent Ernie Aliceda. And Dr. Guy Bailey, of course, with UT. Yeah. Any questions from the audience?
Oh, don't be shy. Come on.
Go ahead,
Yes,
David.
sir.
Legislative session is just going to start.
Right.
But UTRGV, because of medical school and because of the importance of this region, as you mentioned earlier, we were very fortunate to have a very large budget attributed to the university. I think we went from about 125 million to close to 500 million just to start medical school. How does it shape up, do you think, going forward this coming session?
Well, you've got great folks in front of you to, I guess, ask that question. I mean, what we've got to make sure is that we don't lose traction. Again, we know it's going to be a tough year. So if as long as we can, at best, maintain the status quo and not go in reverse, I think we'll be fine. We recognize that this was coming. We appreciated what the legislature did last session. They gave us a small bump, obviously, in formula funding. They helped with the tuition revenue bonds, all of which are going to make all of our universities and our health-related institutions better. So we greatly appreciate that. I said, if we start backtracking, what happens is you get into this sine wave, and it's very difficult for presidents of institutions to manage their institutions if, one session there's a bump, and then the next session they say, we got to take it down. The next session, and it's difficult to manage that. So we would hope that at a minimum, we don't lose any ground. We're obviously, as a system, and we're investing a lot in UTRGV. We're investing a lot in the new medical school, and we think this is as incredible a worthwhile investment as we can make. So we want to be able to make that case as we go forward in the session.
Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
You mentioned earlier that that the campuses were working on creating a system by which to implement the open carry. Could you go into some detail about that? Because as a mother of a student, I'm very, very concerned about that. Having been a UT student graduate myself, I remember very vividly the shooting that was at the tower at the main campus. And so how are you going to be able to differentiate between somebody who's just carrying because they have a license and somebody who seeks to do damage?
Yes, so first let me clarify, you cannot open carry on campuses. So there will be no open carry on the campus. The existing law allows you to open carry in other areas, but not on university campuses. So you won't have any students that are carrying a 6-shooter on their side. This is about the concealed handgun license. And to be a CHL holder, you have to be 21 years old, you have to have gone through some training. And so the issue, the biggest concern amongst the institutions has been, frankly, not knowing who in their the faculty not knowing who in their classrooms may be carrying. Yeah, I think it will be pretty obvious, when it's 102 degrees outside and somebody comes in with a big jacket, that might be the person that is carrying. Having said that, we are putting all the right protocols in place to make sure that, like I said, we can maintain the safety and security. But I also want to make sure people understand this does not mean, people tend to conflate the two issues of an active shooter and a concealed handgun carrier. Somebody can walk off the streets today with a gun and be an active shooter. We have had protocols in place for a long time on the campuses on how to deal with that. We are getting better. We are putting more cops on the beat where we can. We're trying to figure out we're training the policemen and how to deal with active shooter situations. With a concealed handgun license, what we're also training our policemen now is if you come on a scene, and now you have a student who is trying to be heroic, pulls their gun out, and you have a student with a weapon, and you have the active shooter with a weapon. How do you differentiate? These are tough issues for the cops that are part of the UT system. But we are, the regents have invested in a new simulator, which we will have soon for the police academies, that allow the police to go through all these scenarios. We're also looking at campus software that may allow the students, when they see something that doesn't look right, you know, if it doesn't look right, make sure somebody knows about it. And can we use technology today to better inform the police and the students in an area where they may think there's a risk? So we're looking at all those. But again, to clarify, open carry does not occur on the campuses. If you see somebody with a gun on the campus, that's wrong, and call a cop immediately, and we'll work to resolve the issue.
Any other questions? Well, it's shortly before 9:30, and I'm going to conclude today's event with a great thank you to Chancellor
My pleasure.
McRaven for joining us here today.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks, Carlos.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Let's take this off.